I'm Professor David Wilson. As a criminologist, I'm often asked, what's it like to interview a serial killer?
This is a tape-recorded interview. Date is 11/17/84.
In this new series, I'm going to take you on a journey into the dark heart of the police interrogation room. Using cutting-edge lip-sync technology, we'll bring to life the actual taped confessions of some of the world's most notorious murderers.
Put that pillowcase or whatever it looks like, cushion cover over her head.
And bring you face to face with evil.
Put her into the sleeping bag. No, I just slung her in the corner.
And along with forensic psychologist Professor Michael Brooks, I will analyse their interviews in unparalleled detail.
And while he was asleep, I put a noose around his neck. I throttled him with the noose and he hardly struggled.
Like the police detectives who interviewed them, you'll experience firsthand their cold and calculating minds.
I've never gotten with my mum. I knew that she favoured my sister more than me.
Their wicked words, now seen being spoken for the very first time, will never be forgotten.
The Hawkins girl's head was severed and taken up the road, 25 to 50 yards.
One of the greatest challenges facing any police detective comes when they have to interview a child suspected of murder. In today's episode, we hear not one confession by a minor, but two. Teenagers who had killed within a folie à deux, or the madness shared by two. Dubbed by the press as the Twilight Killers, both aged just 14 at the time, they plotted for days to cut the girl's mother and her sister's throat as they slept at the family home in Spalding in Lincolnshire. Recordings of police interviews with minors are usually restricted, but the police took the unusual move of making these public because of the cold and calculated nature of the crimes. The confessions reveal the depth of hatred the girl felt towards her mother and her sibling, and the techniques of neutralization she deployed to convince herself and her boyfriend to do her bidding. Who are these teenage killers? Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham. On April 15th, 2016, the residents of Lincolnshire heard the news that a violent series of murders had unfolded.
Police are appealing for help to determine what led to the deaths of a mother and daughter. Two children are accused of murdering 49-year-old Liz Edwards and 13-year-old Katie Edwards. Police want to hear from anyone who observed any comings or goings from a house in Spalding between Thursday and Friday when the bodies were discovered.
Detectives at Spalding Police Station awaited the arrival of two teenagers, Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham. Both were suspected of involvement in the murders, and they would be interviewed separately. As the tape recorders rolled, no amount of police training or work in the field could prepare those present for the ice-cold descriptions of murder that would be spoken by the children who sat before them. News of the arrest spread rapidly.
I think it made the headlines because it was so unusual. We find very few people under about the age of 17 committing murder, and for two 14-year-olds to be involved in a double murder, it's extremely rare.
All evidence pointed to Edwards and Markham being involved in the murders. The murder weapon was still in the house, and neither of them had made any effort to leave the scene of the crime. No sooner had 14-year-old Edwards sat down, she proceeded to tell detectives precisely how her mother's life had been ended.
He was on top of her, with a pillow over her head. Even though her voice box and all this.
At this stage of the questioning, police were still trying to create a complete picture of what had happened. As Edwards gave her version of events, Markham was questioned by another detective to see if their stories matched up.
I went into her mum's room, stabbed her in the neck where she was asleep on her side, and smothered her face with a pillow. And after I knew she was gone, I went into Katie's room.
I suspect that the officers hearing the two confessions would have been flabbergasted, utterly overwhelmed by what they were hearing. I doubt they could believe their ears.
What came across quite clearly was their calmness. There was no attempt to really hide what they'd done. And in many ways they couldn't, because the evidence was literally there in the house. They were obviously the number one suspects.
This is very rare for two people so young to conspire to murder the family of one of them. We don't normally see this happening at such a young age.
As the twin confessions unfolded, police began to piece together the complex history between the young couple and Edwards' family.
Kim Edwards was the elder daughter of a school dinner lady, Elizabeth Edwards, who had a younger sister called Katie. She went to school in Spalding, in Lincolnshire, where she wasn't particularly happy. She felt that her mother favoured the younger daughter, Katie, over her, and that her mother effectively dissed her, as she would have said, at school. It made her, or convinced her, that somehow her life was dreadful. There was nothing to live for, she was unhappy, and all she was a torment to her family, Elizabeth and Katie. And worse, that her mother, Elizabeth, thought that she would probably turn out like her dad, who had disappeared off the scene.
Just that, well, ever since, I was young, I've never gotten with my mum. I knew that she favoured my sister more than me. And even though she said that she didn't, I knew that she was lying.
Kim felt that she was always second best, and that's what helped to create a very toxic relationship. Her mother had been violent to her when she was young and had reported herself to the social services, and Kim and her sister Katie had been in care for several months when they were very young. There'd been a long history of aggressive, both verbal and physical aggression in the family.
This kind of got much worse when Kim finally met somebody who was a kindred spirit, somebody who was particularly conduct disordered. Lucas Markham was a boy who was probably on the pathway to becoming a rather disruptive and antisocial adult. The two, as it were, found each other and became, if you like, a Bonnie and Clyde kind of couple, where it was them against the world, and more specifically, them against Kim's mother and sister.
As the relationship between the teenagers blossomed, so tensions at the Edward household heightened.
When Kim started going out with Lucas, who was not a character that her mother approved of, this created more problems, and it got to a situation where her mother actually banned Lucas from the house. This, of course, actually just adds to the already toxic relationship.
Once a narrative of that much potency starts to develop and develops between two people and binds two people together, it just becomes stronger and stronger, to the extent, as we see here, where anything which threatens them in any way and threatens the viability of their story, they need to get rid of, they need to eradicate.
There was a considerable animosity between Elizabeth Edwards and her elder daughter, Kim. There was no doubt that they got on each other's nerves profoundly. There was no doubt that Kim felt that she had nothing to live for while her mother was there. She made an attempt to kill herself in early 2016 because she felt she had nothing to live for. She was disturbed.
In all my years as a criminologist, I've never heard a set of confessions to murder distilled with such a degree of simplicity or self-justification. One that suggests a staggeringly high level of psychopathy in the young perpetrators. I'm here with forensic psychologist Professor Michael Brooks to see if he shares my opinion.
I went into her mum's room, stabbed her in the neck where she was asleep on her side, and smothered her face with a pillow.
Well, ever since I was young, I've never got on with my mum. I knew that she favoured my sister more than me. And even though she said that she didn't, I knew that she was lying.
Okay, Michael, that was Lucas Markham and Kim Edwards, the Twilight Killers. And let's start with simply how young those people sounded on the tapes. And you weren't in a youth treatment centre, I suppose, therefore you're not shocked by the fact that these are young people doing this thing.
No, indeed, there were some young people there who had killed relatives.
And one of the things that strikes me about the difference between what we hear from Lucas Markham and then what we hear from Kim Edwards is that Lucas Markham seems very matter of fact. Everything is very instrumental. This is what I did. I then did this, and then that happened. For me, I got much more of Kim Edwards' psychology in this murder.
But for both interviews, there wasn't a sufficient motive for the killing.
And so do you think this is what we would call a folie à deux, a madness shared by two?
I wouldn't have said it was necessarily a madness. They knew what they were doing. What we haven't really found out is why.
So do you not buy some of the things that Kim Edwards is going to tell us, that she was doing this because her mother had always favoured her sister?
To me, that's an insufficient explanation. There's many sort of difficulties within families, between children and parents and between siblings. That doesn't mean to say then that they go on to kill. And certainly Markham was not a member of the family. So why did he become involved?
Now, Markham was disruptive at school and was eventually thrown out. He had to go to another school, leaving Kim at the original. This deeply distressed Kim. She felt that somehow her life was coming to an end and that she had to do something about it. There was no doubt about their intoxication with one another, and particularly his intoxication for her. And steadily, the mother, Elizabeth Edwards, became more concerned. In fact, in the February 2016, she announced that the couple were like a time bomb waiting to go off. What she could not have known is that 7 weeks later, she would die at their hands.
The initial confession by Kim Edwards provided the backdrop to her motivation for plotting the crime. But as Edwards rested before being questioned again, her boyfriend, Lucas Markham, was about to reveal to the police the ease with which he would become a knife-wielding double murderer and his rationale behind committing the crime. He had entered fully into the madness of the world that Edwards had created. By the spring of 2016, the relationship between Edwards and her mother was at breaking point. The Romeo and Juliet narrative they were creating for themselves was by now in full flight, with Markham desperate to offer his young lover a means of escape. And it wasn't just Kim's mother who was to suffer. So too would Kim's innocent sibling, Katie.
One fateful night, Markham said to Edwards, almost as a joke, "I'll kill your mother for you." He then realised that Kim didn't take it as a joke. She actually wanted him to kill her mother and agreed that she would kill her sister at the same time. They would be partners in crime, Bonnie and Clyde as they were later dubbed.
Once that seed was planted, rather than letting it just die, she and Lucas discussed it on a number of occasions. They even spent one night barricaded in her bedroom. So the situation was getting worse and worse and escalating until eventually you got a situation where she only could see an out was with killing her mother.
The fact that her mother, as it were, stood in the way of everything she wanted to do and be. This kind of evolved into a us against the world. They talked to each other, they plotted with each other, but they did not talk to anyone outside of that little duo, which meant that all of their thinking, planning, plotting, no matter how crazy, was never actually met with derision, humour, or alarm by other people, because it wasn't known to anyone else. It subsequently evolved into killing her mother and her sister because, needless to say, one would lead to the other.
Why? What was the reason for killing Katie?
Because she had called the police.
Okay. That the only reason?
Pretty much.
The plan was essentially for Markham to wait until Elizabeth Edwards and Kim's sister Katie were asleep, to climb into the house, kill them in their beds. What he was asked to do was to knock on a bathroom window, and Kim would wake up and let him in. The first twice they tried this, she fell asleep and didn't wake up to hear him knocking. But undeterred, Lucas Markham returned. And on the night of April the 14th, she heard him knocking. Kim Edwards admits Markham to the house. She has procured a bag of 6 kitchen knives. Markham says to Edwards, "Are you sure you want me to do this?" And she says, "Yes, but I don't think I can kill my sister." Markham, depraved though this may sound, says, "Don't worry, I'll do it for you."
Having settled on a killing weapon, Markham ascended the stairs. In the master bedroom, he found Mrs. Edwards asleep. He proceeded to stab her in the neck and then suffocate her with a pillow. The killing frenzy ended with Mrs. Edwards being stabbed a further 8 times.
Edwards hears a lot of her mother's struggles, but doesn't intervene to say, oh, I've changed my mind, or stop, or nothing. Just keeps up with the plan.
With Mrs. Edwards dead in her bed, detectives try to comprehend why Markham would then move on to killing her daughter Katie. His response stunned them.
Why? What was the reason for killing Katie?
Because she had called the police.
As her interview proceeded, Edwards was rapidly setting out her stall, making it clear that she was orchestrating every murderous act and did nothing to discourage the carnage that was unfolding. Her only concern was for the welfare of her boyfriend.
I went into the room to see what was going on because I heard noises and stuff. So I just wanted to check if he was okay.
We see her being concerned about whether, when he goes upstairs, whether he's all right. No consideration of what might be happening to her mother and sister. That they are so consumed by the narrative that they have built up together that's all that matters.
Lucas stabbed Kim's mother through the neck and then suffocated her with a pillow. This took a little while. He then stealthily moved into the sister's room and repeated this process with the sister, who was slightly more resistant. However, he succeeded in killing both.
Professor Michael Brooks and I have had many discussions about murder over the years, but this case, because of its uniqueness and complexity, polarizes our professional opinions.
Why? What was the reason for killing Katie?
Because she had called the police.
Okay. Is that the only reason?
Pretty much.
I went into the room to see what was going on because I heard noises and stuff. So I just wanted to check if he was okay.
And by Kim going in to check that Markham is doing the killing, that means she's literally witnessing her mother's murder, her mother's death.
And complicit in its arrangement.
And therefore, why do you think that Lucas Markham is the dominant? For me, she goes in to make sure Markham is carrying out what she wants to happen.
But why did he allow that to occur?
Love.
But we don't know that actually Kim necessarily wanted her mother to die.
She said that she does want her mother to die. She says that repeatedly in the confession.
Well, or is that justifying what then happened?
Markham in particular is covered in blood. So they decide that they'll take a bath together. Bear in mind, the house has 2 dead bodies in it, although Edwards has thought to cover up her sister with a blanket, not her mother. The two get into a bath together and she puts on her minion's pyjamas and Markham and she start to have tea cakes. They have a little midnight, early hours feast. They have sex and then they watch Twilight movies. They watch 3 of the Twilight movies. They have been called the Twilight Killers.
Bizarrely, they stayed in the house. Most people, when they commit a killing, try to separate themselves from the scene, both physically and psychologically. Here, we've got a situation where they did the complete opposite, and they spent 36 hours basically in the house while upstairs her mother and her sister were dead in their beds.
A lack of genuine remorse or display of empathy is not unusual amongst those who murder multiple victims. However, the degree of disengagement with which Edwards describes the crime and her motivations for doing it are highly unusual. And as her final confession reveals, most disturbing of all is her egocentric belief that she was actually doing her victims a favour by having them murdered. As her boyfriend Markham killed her mother and sister, Edwards looked on with a sense of satisfaction. Listen to the flat affect in her voice as she describes the murders.
I thought I heard her say "get off me," but I'm not entirely sure. Then after about 10 minutes of Lucas putting his weight on her, like she was dead. Like
he was quite clear, clinically clear, without a hint of remorse or tearfulness in any way. That kind of attitude is scary. This, in a child, was astoundingly stark and frightening.
The hardened detectives were astonished by Edward's ongoing confession.
I was okay with it. Just the fact that it happened so quickly, but gave me peace of mind because, it wasn't like torture or anything.
The original plan had been for them to commit suicide together the following afternoon at 2 o'clock, but somehow or other that slipped away. And so they watched the 4th Twilight movie together, and inevitably, Lucas Markham's mother, after all he'd disappeared from the house, had reported him missing. Eventually, on April 15th, 2016, the police break in at around midday. They say, "Where's your mother?" to Kim Edwards. "She's upstairs." What's she doing? "Well, you better go and look for yourself." The two uniformed officers then find Elizabeth and Katie Edwards stabbed to death in their beds.
And how do you feel about it on reflection now?
The same way.
What, relieved that it's done?
Yeah.
In many ways, they were honest because A, the evidence was clearly against them, and B, she actually thought she was doing the right thing. This is what comes across in the case. She doesn't feel that she was doing anything horrendous. The problem was her mother, and to dispose of her mother would solve her problems. And that suggests a very mature, very naive approach to life.
Feel happy about it?
To a point, yes.
What's that?
Yes, because my mum doesn't have to deal with me anymore. Being, suicidal, and she doesn't have to wake up worrying every morning to see if I'm still alive. And my sister doesn't have to go through all the heartbreak and all the emotions and stuff.
This justification, this rationalisation that what she did was okay, would seem so flimsy to your average person. But for this child, it was rationale enough to violently have her mother killed and her own sister killed.
With the first interviews over, police reflected on the information they had and whether, after this golden hour of questioning, they would be able to gain any further valuable information from the youngsters, always mindful of the challenges faced when interviewing children.
You've got to be very careful when you're interviewing children. One of the problems is suggestibility, and a lot of children, very young children, are very suggestible, so you have to be careful that you don't put words into their mouths. The other thing is you've got to be careful how you interview them, give them plenty of time to rest, not to put them under stress. They also should have a lawyer with them, and they should have an appropriate adult to look after their interests.
Children are always going to understand the confession situation differently from adults who typically going to be aware. I think from the children in particular, they're always going to carry with them the idea that somehow or another, if they just speak the truth, if they just confess, that somehow it's all going to be okay.
What really could have driven these teenagers with no known prior violent behaviour to commit such a horrific crime? It's a question I'm determined to put to Professor Michael Brooks. And it's Edward's explanation for the murders which troubles me the most.
Feel happy about it?
To a point, yes.
What's that?
Yes, because my mum doesn't have to deal with being suicidal, and she doesn't have to wake up worrying every morning to see if I'm still alive. And my sister doesn't have to go through all the heartbreak and all the emotions and stuff.
We shouldn't simply accept that she wants her mother dead because her mother has never liked her and has always favoured her younger sister.
I wouldn't accept that at face value, no.
And also the murder of the younger sister. It's almost like this is a family annihilation, but carried out by proxy. It's almost as if Kim Edwards has contracted a hitman, Markham, to obliterate those people who are closest to her.
But did Kim really know that her sister was going to be killed as well?
Do you doubt that?
Because I think that it's Markham who is much more likely to have been the dominant influence. I think he then decided to kill Katie rather than Kim. Why did Markham get involved? What was his reason? Even if Kim said she wanted her mother killed, for doing it. There's many times that children will make statements that they don't really mean. And it sounds to me from reading this that Kim is trying to put a justification around it, even though she was completely didn't know it was happening. Perhaps she didn't really want it to occur. But there was something around Markham that wanted to engage in killing someone.
And smothered her face with a pillow.
Lucas Markham projected the idea that he was basically completely besotted with Kim Edwards and was possibly ready to do almost anything that she wanted him to. In fact, when they started to make definite plans about killing her mother, that's when their relationship rekindled quite a lot.
What the criminologists and psychologists call folie à deux, the mixture of two people making the crime worse, or the act worse than it would be if committed by one of them alone, is rare enough. For it to be found in two teenagers is extremely rare, and even more so for the dominant force in the relationship not to be the man. A woman using a man in a folie à deux relationship to commit an act of murder or more than one murder. It's very, very rare indeed.
When played in court, the confessions of Edwards and Markham would lead to the jury totally rejecting Kim Edwards' defense that she had a psychological condition which would diminish her responsibility. The confessions led to an unpalatable but inevitable conclusion. Hatred, selfishness, and a twisted sense of love and loyalty turned these teenagers into murderers.
I'm sure you realise at this stage just how serious this is, don't you? You're a very young girl. But this is very, very serious. So you and Lucas.
Where did you think up to kill your family, to do it via a knife, to stab them in the throat, to have a bath afterwards, to commit suicide afterwards? Where's all this come from? Where's all this? Have you seen something like it? Have you read something like it?
No, not really. I just like a general knowledge, really. Because the voice box stabbing in the throat, the bath because of the dog, so she wouldn't smell the blood and also because I don't like the smell of blood. And committing suicide after. It's just most people who do commit murders try to commit suicide themselves.
Her confessions to the police are, to put it politely, calculated, cold. She shows no regret. She doesn't demonstrate any sense of remorse. She thinks, in fact, that she's been let off the hook. I'm rather pleased.
I don't know if you've got anything working that you want to get clear.
Most police interviewers work on the principle that you slowly, stage by stage, wear down the resistance of the person that you're actually interrogating. In the case of Kim Edwards, she seemed to get stronger rather than sort of beginning to grasp what she had done, to begin to see the enormity of what she had done. She began to harden stage by stage, possibly becoming more narcissistic and more arrogant that what she did was the right thing to do.
When the case went to court, the jury were unanimous in their decision and the police relieved at the result.
What makes this case even more shocking is that these two were 14 years of age when they planned, committed these callous, senseless and unprovoked attacks on Elizabeth and Katie.
One of the problems is, in this case, is I think neither of them really were attached emotionally to what they've done. They kind of lacked any real affect in their relationship with the authorities and with the parents. We have examples of psychopathic tendencies where they show no guilt, no real depth of emotions, no real understanding of the consequences of their behaviour.
Markham is very much the blunt weapon that's executed the crime that she wanted. And the two are charged and convicted, the two youngest British killers, the first double murderers at 14.
So there was nothing that you'd seen, you'd read, or anything that gave you this sort of notion. Nobody had discussed it with you. All your own doing, just you and Lucas.
One interesting aspect of this killing couple is the idea that their story never changes. There was not one of them covering up for the other or any kind of bickering or trying to undermine the other person and they could take the blame and not me. There was none of this. There was nothing. It was like Blackpool Rock. It was the same story all the way through because that was the real reason that they did it.
It's quite unusual that they're being so open and direct in their confessions. The narrative here that's driving them is such a strong one. It's a kind of Romeo and Juliet story that's driving the two of them, that's binding the two of them together, and that they're supporting and feeding and building it up together. That actually they cease to see that what they're doing might not be right.
Because the voice box, the stabbing in the throat, the bath because of the dog, so she wouldn't smell the blood and also because I don't like the smell of blood. And committing suicide after. It's just most people who do commit murders try to commit suicide themselves.
One of the things that interests both you and I is helping people change their behaviour. And with young people, I always think there is the possibility that they can change in their lives. What sort of work would we have to do with Markham and Edwards?
Well, I don't think we could do anything of significance until we found out what were the real reasons. Who was the dominant partner? I think it's Markham. Was he doing it as you mentioned? about Kim wanting it to occur for love, or did Markham carry it out for love?
Would you want them to be separate?
But I doubt that very much. In most instances in which there's a male and female relationship in which offences occur, it's usually the male that's a dominant partner. It's the male who's directing, and it's the female who is complicit within that and submissive within that, and who goes along with that and is drawn into the actions of the male.
These Twilight Killers seem to me to be thoroughly reprehensible, and I still think that Kim Edwards is the dominant within that relationship. You wouldn't accept that at all?
I think it's highly unlikely.
On June the 8th, the reporting restrictions on the case were lifted. Such was the calculated nature of the murders, the unusual step was taken to name Markham and Edwards in the British press.
She would go, like, I went into Katie's room, which is the same room as Kim's, and I thought I stabbed her, but I'm not 100% sure if it was like her or the mattress.
The fact that the police actually released the interviews with Markham and Edwards probably emanates from the fact that these interviews actually did impress the police so much that these individuals were so arrogant about having committed this crime that they probably thought that the public would have seen them as children and this was an exaggeration. So actually releasing these interviews did make it clear to the public and all just the nature of these two killers.
A life sentence now stretches out before Edwards and Markham. They will have time to reflect upon their crimes and hopefully work towards rehabilitation back into society when they reach adulthood.
I've dealt with a number of children who've committed murder, and they find it very difficult later on. She won't find it difficult at the moment, but in another 10 years' time, when she's had the maturity to look back and realise what she's done, then I think she's going to have problems. Matricide is unusual to say the least, and I think in 10, 15 years' time, it will hit her what she's really done. I understand that, like Henley and Brady, like a lot of relationships, while they were very intense while they were together, they've now split up, and they're actually having quite a vitriolic relationship with each other. And this is quite often the case, that having had that intense situation, they can't maintain it, and then they start blaming each other.
I went into her mum's room, stabbed her in the neck.
Most police, and in fact most people who have studied this case, are completely baffled by the children's attitude after the killing.
He stabbed her through the neck, I think, through that way, because she was on the side.
Maybe we are seeing a new generation of children who have a capacity to kill others and who are, if you like, more essentially narcissistic than previous generations in thinking that they were quite entitled to do so.
Well, ever since I was young, I've never got on with my mum. I knew that she favoured my sister more than me.
To this day, it remains utterly incomprehensible that a half joke from a 14-year-old boy should be taken seriously by a 14-year-old girl who thinks that she can take her mother and sister's life to make herself feel better. It chills to the bone, still. Perhaps it's sad, but true. She convinced him that murder can be child's play. And play it was.